excited are we to have George, Leah, and Telly here today? I am so thrilled that all three of you are here. I've seen Allegiance twice on Broadway. It's not only worth seeing, it's worth seeing multiple times. George, I'm going to start with you because this is such a personal story. Can you give us a little background on your history and how it shaped the formation of this musical?
Well, I was 5 years old at the time that the soldiers came to our home to order us out. And we were first taken to the horse stables at Santa Anita Racetrack because the camps weren't built yet. So that was our temporary, what they call, assembly center.
And this is because America was at war with Japan and the government...
Pearl Harbor had been bombed, and we Americans of Japanese ancestry happened to look like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor. And mass war hysteria and racism and the failure of political leadership put us into those camps. And the failure of political leadership is very important right now. I mean, we sense the echo of 75 years ago here. Back then, California had an attorney general, the top attorney of the state. He was a good man. He knew the law. He knew the Constitution, but he was an ambitious politician. He wanted to run for governor, and he saw that the single most popular political issue in California was the get rid of the Japs movement. And so this attorney general became an outspoken leader of the get rid of the Japs movement. And he made an amazing statement. He said there have been no reports of sabotage or spying or fifth column activities by Japanese Americans. And that is ominous, because the Japanese are inscrutable. You don't know what they're thinking, so we better lock them up before they do anything. So for this attorney general, the absence of evidence was the evidence. A lawyer making a statement like that, and this fed into this mass hysteria across the nation and got us incarcerated.
Just to reiterate, this is, while it is certainly a part of the plot of Allegiance, which is now on Broadway, this is what actually happened to you when you were 5 years old. You and your family were taken from your home, sent to a horse stable, and then sent to an internment camp.
In the swamps of southeastern Arkansas. There were 10 camps altogether, all in the most godforsaken places in this country. Our story takes place in Heart Mountain, Wyoming. A desolate, forbidding, the high plains. Very dusty, very cold in the wintertime, very hot in the summertime. There were also camps in Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, Colorado, and 2 in California, and 2, can you imagine, on that blistering hot desert of Arizona. 10 of them altogether.
Well, your story, and especially the way that you have risen from that internment into the amount of success that you have had. Of course, Star Trek is where most people learned your face, and you still have countless fans around the world from Star Trek.
We lived long and prospered.
Thank you for doing that, George. I think that you have, I can cross something off my bucket list for having seen you in person say that. This story is fictionalized, though, right? You've taken the seeds of your story and planted them and made them grow into something new, which
into
also...
a flower.
Yes,
An
into a
flower.
That metaphor is echoed in the show, which you'll see when you go to the Longacre Theater. Leah, can you talk about how your character fits into the story that George has laid out?
Okay, I play kind of, well, what has become an amalgamation of quite a few different characters over the course of the development of the show. I became involved with Allegiance in 2009 as a completely different character with a completely different arc and a very different name. I started out as Gloria, who was actually going to be Sammy's sister-in-law, because at the time there used to be an older brother named James, but then he goes off into war and is killed.
So we should just say Sammy is the lead character in the show. Telly
Yes,
Leung,
which is Telly Leung.
plays this very headstrong and motivated, patriotic American who is determined to fight on behalf of his country, America, in the war against Japan.
Right. And once Mark Aceto came into the process before the show was got its production in San Diego, all these characters, there was a mother, there was the older brother, they were killed off. And the storyline was streamlined, which meant having to sacrifice a few beloved characters.
But
a
you
lot of them
just
ended up
write Leia Salonga out of a Broadway show.
No. No.
So they found a new spot
So I
for
ended
you.
up being the older sibling and the maternal figure, while still being this kind of older sister character, older sister figure to Sammy. So that became Keiko, or Kay for short. So everybody calls me Kay. And I figure as a maternal character who's very compliant with pretty much the environment around her, because of her mother passing away when she's a very, like, a burgeoning, like kind of becoming a woman. All of this responsibility that used to fall on the mother now falls on her. She pretty much raises Sammy, watching over him as he grows up. She is the one that takes care of the grandfather, which George also gets to play in the show, and the father figure. So it's this very close-knit family unit, but there are things that happen once the internment takes place, and she then starts to, in the desolateness of Heart Mountain, she begins to blossom, and she begins to then figure out who she is as a human being, as a woman, who she is in relation to members of her family, and she starts to really think for herself as to what her opinions are on the internment, on the war, on the violation of the constitutional rights of this entire community, and she falls in love for the first time with a man who would end up being a resistor, Frankie. And that kind of also shapes who she is. So that's, in a nutshell, in a very big nutshell, that's who she is.
The polar opposite of your brother.
Exactly.
I want to also just take a moment to compliment you on Higher, which is
Thank
a
you.
pivotal moment. It's a key moment in the show where you are standing alone on the stage. It's a gorgeous ballad, and I think that it's destined to be in your songbook forever. I think that it's
been in my
it's a
songbook
new
for a few
signature
years now.
song for you. I mean, I guess not that new since you started this process years ago.
Yeah,
but.
it actually, how that song came to be, pretty interesting. Jay Quo, who wrote the song, calls it, it's like a fashion designer making something for the Oscar red carpet that's custom for somebody who's going to walk on the Oscar red carpet. And it didn't exist until very late in the rehearsal process of the production in San Diego.
Which was 2012?
2012. And Jay tells the story far better than I ever could. But I think it was when he was so sleep deprived and seemingly depleted of every little bit of mental energy that he could muster, that's when he finally could hear the song in his head. It was like, we need to make sure that all of the junk that you normally have in your head is gone before you can hear the song. And once he heard it, he put it down on paper. I think that was a Monday. I learned the song maybe a day or two after, and that Friday, I think it was Sitzprobe. We put it into the show, and yeah, so I'm very pleased. And it has gone virtually untouched since that production. A few lyric trims here and there, but it is the song.
I remember that moment of, we didn't have a song for 3 or 4 weeks of rehearsal for Leia. And, you have Leia Salonga in a show, and she doesn't have a song. So there was this, pressure on this team to write something. And and very much in the way that this community, in the kind of the desolateness of Heart Mountain, they found a way to survive, and they found a way to create beauty out of nothing. I mean, that really is what Allegiance is about, this community, this family that finds beauty and has moments of awakening out of a moment where they felt like they lost everything, and they were able to find themselves in that kind of emptiness. And I think our creative team went through the same kind of journey with the show, where they felt like we have nothing left. and we're in front of an audience in a week. And then all of a sudden, the song dawns on them. And so I remember it was kind of a magical moment when we all heard you sing it for the first time. We said, that's it.
I
You
love
nailed it.
how life imitates art in that way. And I do want to just stress that even though a lot of the subject matter in this show is very dark, there are some incredible moments of levity. There's so much beauty. There are laughs in the show. George, in particular, I think that you are just the heart of this show, and there's so many smiles, and it really has an uplifting image. I think sometimes when we talk about a show based in war and based in oppression, that can be a little bit like, oh, do I want to go out to see a night of theater where I'm just going to be depressed? But this is not a depressing story. It is a joyful, wonderful, lovely story. And I'm so glad that it was just announced a couple of days ago that there will be an Allegiance cast album, which means that even if you don't have yeah, yay! Even for people who don't get a chance to come to New York to see the show, the music will be out there for the world to hear. Telly, what's your favorite number to sing in the show?
Gosh, I have so many favorite numbers. Just on that point about how this community kind of found a way to survive this through joy, through being together, through finding the joy in one another, even though they were imprisoned in this camp. There's a number called "Get in the Game" that's in the show that is about. It's about how this community is trying to find a way to pass the time, to make life better there. You know, at the time, nobody knew how long they were going to be there. So they had to kind of rally with each other and go, what are we going to do? You know, how are we going to create community out of this place? And what they landed upon was forming a baseball team and actually having kind of an intramural sports game in the camps. And, you know, this is actually based on historical fact. There was an actual Heart Mountain All-Stars, a baseball team. They had games against the Caucasian guards, you know. I mean, this was an actual real thing that this community did. And it's so interesting. When I first was asked to be a part of the show and I started doing the research, it wasn't all of the sad parts of this event that actually moved me. What moved me is how this community was able to get on, even though they were trapped in this place. I mean, that they were able to form baseball teams and have camp dances, and they were able to, you know, form even their own schools in that.
The farming.
And farming, you know, farming and dry land. They were able to plant seeds and grow vegetables in a place where people said it is impossible to do that. So, I don't know, this community making the impossible possible, I think, is what really moved me about the story.
Well, that moment in the show, too, I think illustrates something that is key to the reason that this story needed to be told, which is baseball is as all-American as you can get. And there's one thing I know that George objects to strongly, which is when people refer to these camps as Japanese internment camps, because these were not Japanese, these were Americans. And what could better illustrate that than the fact that they chose to have like square dancing parties and play baseball?
Yeah.
So much boogieing and
Yeah.
the love of the Andrews sisters and Frank Sinatra. And George tells the story of of his barrack being across from the mess hall where all the teenagers would have their camp dances and hearing the music, the 40s big band music coming in through his window and him being up at night and listening to it.
We were children. We were supposed to be asleep.
Well, I also love that about this show. You know, there's for all of our music fans and music theater lovers out there, there's a sound to this show that is something that Jay Kuo and our orchestrator Lynn Shankel has created. It's this beautiful combination of music theater music, but also the sound of the 40s, that kind of swinging Andrews Sister sound. But also there's elements of also Asian music and pentatonic scales and things like that that are very prevalent, you know, and instrumentation as well. From, you know, there's koto in the show, and there's, you know, so I mean,
those drums.
like,
Those drums.
taiko drums, and I mean, so the combination of kind of all three of those styles. Actually, it's my 5th Broadway show. I've never heard a show kind of orchestrated or sound like this. So I think audiences are also in store for something really new and fresh.
And all this is organic. I mean, it's not like separate and apart. It's organic to the telling of the story. Leia and I have a song titled Ishikara Ishi, and that captures both the philosophy, stone by stone, you can move a mountain, and the origami flower, too. is made out of a loyalty questionnaire, the notorious loyalty questionnaire, which
Right.
was really an offensive piece of paper.
So
And yet
this is another key element of the show. In order to weed out potential Japanese Americans who were troublemakers, they asked them questions on a piece of paper, and a couple of the questions were sort of worded in a shady way.
Well, the most offensive one was 28, which was one sentence which had two conflicting ideas. It asked, will you swear your loyalty to the United States of America, and will you forswear your loyalty to the Emperor of Japan? We're Americans, and for the government to assume that we have an inborn racial genetic loyalty to the emperor was outrageous. My mother was born in Sacramento. My father was a San Franciscan, and I, as a child, didn't have to respond to the loyalty questionnaire, but I was born in Los Angeles. And for the government to assume that we have a inborn loyalty to the emperor was outrageous. So if you answered no, meaning I don't have a loyalty to the emperor to forswear, you were saying no to the first part of the very same sentence. If you answered yes, meaning I do swear my loyalty to the United States, then you're confessing that you had been loyal to the emperor and were now willing to set that aside and repledge your loyalty to the United States. It was an outrageous, offensive, insulting questionnaire, which we turned into a beautiful piece of origami flower.
I don't know if you can see it, but I'm wearing a little pin that is the actual logo for Allegiance. Oh yeah, of course, it's on the playbill. So they actually took this offensive questionnaire and folded it into a flower that Kay at one point wears in her hair.
During the dance.
During the dance, yep.
And it was really that questionnaire, I mean, to put it into perspective, that is kind of, it's the most kind of shockingly relevant part of our show that makes it so relevant for today, because it would be as if we all said today that we assumed all Muslim Americans were terrorists.
Right.
I mean, it's as offensive as saying that now.
Yeah, it would be like if
in
you
our
put a
world.
piece of paper that said, do you promise to stop being a terrorist? Which would make them say, sort of acknowledge that they had at some point been one.
I mean, it's
Right.
and that's I don't know. I think that is the thing that I can feel the audience every night during the show, during this part of the show, where they go, oh my gosh, this happened in the 40s, but it is happening actually right now.
It's way too relevant, and there's so much like lyrics in the show, and sometimes they'll just hit me and I'll start crying because it's like, I don't feel like this happened in the 1940s when Chris Nomura is like, you and him are like having at it, and George and I are sitting at the table, and he says the line and points to his face. He says, "We look like enemy," and I'm just like, okay, that's just hitting way too close to home right now. It gets scary to be up on the stage and listening to all of this, and I just have to sit there and wait for the moment to pass. It's too...
The headlines,
it's
every
too painful.
political, the Republican campaign, they are mouthing the very same phrases and sentences with slight distinctions for our time that we heard back in the 40s. The broad brush characterization of a group of people. All Syrians are supposed to be terrorists, and that's why we're not gonna accept any of them. That's the very same way that we were characterized. We were all the enemy. And the more fastidious ones said we were non-aliens. What's that? A non-alien. That's a citizen. But we were not described as citizens. We were non-aliens.
Well, that questionnaire leads to the central conflict in the show,
Right.
and actually leads to a separation between Sammy and Kay. Kay says, "I will not make this statement. I'm going to answer no on the questionnaire."
Well, Kay actually, no. She doesn't go quite that far. A lot of the young people actually did put yes, yes, and yes, and I would assume that Kay did. But being a woman, I don't think that she would have been
right.
sent on active duty anyway. And Sammy, being as American
So there were
as he
women
is,
who responded to that.
with no. Yeah, but I'm...
And yeses.
Oh, yeah. But
One
I'm
of the
assuming,
things
though,
about
that
this
this
question-
character did not say
I
no.
suspect that Kay left it blank.
Possibly.
But Sammy was so eager to actually enlist in the war that the opportunity to swear his allegiance to America canceled out his worry about the second half of that question, and he actually did go off to war.
Yeah, there was a deep belief after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the young, after something like that happens, and I can only equate it to, I'm a New Yorker. After 9/11, there was kind of a wave of patriotism, of defending your country, of defending your loved ones who live in this country, and we're seeing that again with Paris. How Parisians, they're saying there's a huge wave of nationalism in France right now, and same thing. Sammy's character goes through the same thing, where the bombing of Pearl Harbor happens, and he's an American kid born in California. So what does he do? He goes and he enlists. Of course, when he goes to enlist, he actually gets rejected because he happens to look like the enemy. He happens to look Japanese, or his family was from Japan, even though he is pure-blooded American. So when it came time for the loyalty questionnaire to come down, and question number 27, the one that was before, the offensive question, the two-part question was, will you bear arms to serve your country? And of course, Sammy answers yes, that they're now going to allow the young people from these camps to serve. Now, in hindsight, now that we can look back on it, it was because there was an actual shortage of men to draft. So the government said, well, we have all these able-bodied American men in these camps. We should draft them to fight in the war. But many of these young American kids like Sammy, they felt like, well, if I volunteer to serve, that will prove that we are as American as everybody else. And if we can prove that, they will let our families go. And there's so many men who volunteered and said yes to that. And actually, they were all part of the 442nd Regiment, which today continues to be the most decorated unit in military history, and they fought with valor, and they fought in Europe, and they fought some of the most dangerous missions and suffered the most casualties, but they fought very bravely, and they're still celebrated today as one of the most decorated units, because that was where their patriotism came from. It was from a desire to prove how American they were so that their families could one day be free.
But the tragedy that follows that is after the war, the victors, which were the 442nd, vilified the resistors and those that answered no, no. And in our play, it fractures the family, but symbolically, it fractured the Japanese-American community. And that fracture still exists today with many, many families.
Well, I think the show does such a wonderful job of celebrating Sammy's patriotism as a symbol for the patriotism of all of the Americans of Japanese descent at that time. Hopefully it does teach a lesson that is universal to what we're going through today. I highly recommend that everyone go see Allegiance. See it more than once. Start by seeing it once. And pick up the cast album when it comes out. We have time for a few questions from the audience.
So I wanted to ask really quick about your decision to make this a musical, because I'm a musical percussionist and everything, and the grind of what it goes involved is already difficult, and then when you do the tragedies, it weighs on you at times where you're just like, don't cry, you got to get through the song. And then knowing that this is a part that's really a part of your life, I mean, it's a lot for someone of your status to actually decide to do this. And was it always going to be this way, or was there ever a hesitation about reliving this constantly?
Telling the story of the internment of Japanese Americans has been the mission of my life from my 20s. I've been on speaking tours throughout the country and internationally as well. We founded a museum called the Japanese American National Museum to keep that story alive in perpetuity. And it's always been I wrote an autobiography, which I had thoughts of dramatizing. But then a chance meeting in a Broadway theater with Jay Kuo, and we started talking about this production. And I told him that I'm thinking of a drama. And Jay said, oh, absolutely not. Musical theater has the power of hitting people so profoundly here, and particularly Japanese Americans who culturally are rather contained and reticent. Music and singing affords that character to externalize that thought musically. And I, being a fan of musical theater, I absolutely agreed and saw the logic of his argument. And that's how it became a musical.
As a follow-up, George, I know that you are a social media legend, and is it true that you created your social media accounts 10 years or so ago, specifically so that when the time came to promote Allegiance, you would have a platform on which to do so?
Well, I had a blog even before that, primarily directed at sci-fi geeks and nerds.
Really?
Yes. I wonder why. But then when we started working on Allegiance, again, it was Jay's idea. It's a wonderful medium to build an audience, particularly when we have a subject matter that could be considered sobering. We want to tell it as a musical. And so we, first of all, had to educate the audience to the history, because there are so many people that still to this day don't know that chapter of American history. So this is a wonderful way to raise the awareness of that chapter of American history. And then once that level has been reached, then to introduce the fact that we have a musical on it and build an audience, tilling the soil, so to speak. And by the time we're ready to open, we had a whole nation of people that knew about Allegiance, were enthusiastic about Allegiance. And in San Diego, our run was a record-breaking run. We had full houses throughout the run. The Old Globe Theater, a very respected regional theater, has a 77-year history, and we broke their 77-year history for both box office and attendance. And so here we are in this great big market of New York, which is much, much more competitive than San Diego. And we're discovering that selling our show is a real challenge.
Well, hopefully a lot of people who see this interview today will buy tickets. Do we have another question from the audience?
Hi, I saw the Broadway 2 weeks ago. Just want to say that you guys were amazing. I'm seeing you on stage. Like, I thought the songs were lovely, and the story was like so inspiring to everyone who loved the history. And I want to know is that, what is your plans for the future, and do you see this Broadway going on tour?
Well, Lorenzo and I have been talking.
Lorenzo's one of the
Lorenzo
producers and
is-
also one of the book writers.
Well, a co-book writer and our lead producer. We envision a road company, but we want to have the imprimatur of Broadway first. And so that's why we're here today, to urge you all, you know something about Allegiance now, go out, organize a theater party, and tell all your friends and relatives all over the metropolitan New York area, and come to Allegiance so that we will have a road company.
You know, there's also, what I also love about what Lorenzo and his team is doing is that the goal, the real deep goal, is to get as many people to hear this story as possible. So, you know, our plan is to be a part of that. You know, our plan is to get this message to as many people as possible. And they've even started a program called Inspire Change, where they're bringing students in. You know, they're subsidizing students to be able to come in and see the show. Because, you know, it's more than just, I really believe this is more than just a show, that this story needs to be told right now, at this moment, and especially to the youth and to the next generation of people, because they are our future lawmakers, you know, senators, presidents, the congressmen, you know, those are the people that are kind of paving the way for our future. And they have to learn about this part of our history so that they can create a better world when they're adults. So it's about getting the show out there and this story out there in a way that reaches the most people possible. So that's really our plan. Whether it's doing it here in New York, taking it on the road, you know, streaming it at some point, you know, that's my goal is to someday have every student know this show and this story and this music.
I think the bottom line for Broadway across the board is the better the show does in New York, the more likely it is to tour. Yeah. So get tickets here and you're more likely to get tickets out there.
In your hometown.
Yeah. Leia, you've toured a lot around the world doing solo shows and concerts and musicals all over the world. I know you're extremely beloved in the Philippines. Actually, when I said I was going to be here today on Twitter, the amount of response I got from your fan base, both there and here, was overwhelming in the best way. And they asked me to send their love to you here in person. So consider that love.
Thank you
sent
very much.
to you.
Maraming salamat po. Thank you.
I also want to take a moment to promote the fact that Telly has a new album out.
Oh, yeah.
It's called Songs for You. It's a beautiful jazzy mix. Beautiful mix of musical theater songs, some pop songs, everything from Billy Joel to Michael Jackson, and it's fantastic. So I think everyone should go out and get that. And for those of you who don't know, George has a sort of not so secret life as a member of the Howard Stern show on Sirius XM Radio. And,
Oh my.
George, I love listening to you on that show, and it's a little bit more of an adult content. You may learn more about George and his life than you ever thought you wanted to know. But I know Howard has been talking about Allegiance and the show for a long time, so we appreciate that support. When will Howard come and actually see the show?
Well, Howard did come to the opening, to the red carpet, as a friendship gesture, and he was terrific. And many people and talked about it on the show. But he is a very visually compelling person.
He's
And-
6'6" or something, right?
Yes, and lean and tall with a wild mane of hair. And he said, I'm what's known as visual obstruction if he goes to the theater. And so he doesn't want to be that. And so he doesn't want to be surrounded by fans and immobilized coming in and leaving. So he's going to come very discreetly. And he's going to sit where he won't be an obstruction. And he's going to leave very discreetly. So that is the understanding we have.
Well, look, he has no excuse. I went to a show where President Obama was in the audience. If he can be snuck in and snuck out, then Howard has no excuse.
He has Secret Service.
Well, that's true. And no one else has any excuse to miss this show either. It's such a fantastic production. I'm so proud to be here with you guys today. Congratulations on all you've achieved, and hopefully Allegiance will have a good long run on Broadway
Thank
and
you.
beyond. Thanks, everybody, for being here with us.